This is the Almost Daily Zencast. Hello, and Namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible MrZeppo. Let's get started. Happy 2020 to you, friends. It is I, the incorrigible MrZeppo, your humble host and eccentric tour guide in the world of esoteric opinion. Here we are, my friends. 2020. Bum, 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 bum. Right? Cue music from that one space movie that I just suddenly thought of now and not 20 minutes ago, so I could have had ready in time for the show. 2020. Isn't it weird that here we are? For those of you of a certain age, old enough to feel like I do, you'll understand what I'm about to say. We are literally living in the future. But of course, that's always true, right? Because every moment of every day is the future to some distant past, and the past to some distant future. And every moment is, of course, now. What time is it? Now. What time is it now? Now. But now, is it now? Yes. Always. It is now. Okay, so here we are, now, in the future, 2020, the present, and what will eventually become the past, folks. Because, as you may or may not be aware of, I am, as a matter of fact, a robot from the future sent here to warn you about the robots in the future. And in that future, it is my past, this year, 2020, that I look back and recall, that's right, 2020 is the year that the biogenomic robots came to light. And people were like, wow, we're really moving towards this transhumanistic robot, cybernetic, living life form that's not born but built modality. Breaking news, folks, it actually happened last year, but this is the year that it becomes a household common concept like Alexa or Wi-Fi, right? There's always this threshold where something that's been developing becomes so fundamentally common that we just presume that it is always there and it has always been there in a certain way, and that all future generations will grow up surrounded by it in such a way that they cannot conceive of a life without that thing. That's right here and right now, folks. Living cellular robots. Look it up. I'm not making things up. Sometime last year, scientists in the field of genomics and robotics managed to organize African frog, not T cells, what are they called? Those really important protocellular structures, names currently escaping me. We all have them. We cultivate them, right? We harvest them in order to develop scientific things. What are they called? Gosh darn it. Anyways, it doesn't matter. Using these fundamental cellular structures harvested from some certain African frog or another, scientists have created objects that defy either genomics or robotics in that they are a little bit of both. Scientists have created living cellular robots, automata, not built from metal and wire and pneumatic components, but cells that have been designed, printed, or somehow cultivated in the laboratory and programmed to do only that which they have been programmed to do. There's a really great article on Apple News, and I'm sure you can find it and or similar journalism about it on your other or your favorite news platforms, because even Fox News did a little bit of robot fear-mongering with this one, if I recall correctly, although I don't have any references in front of me. But I digress. The robots are coming, folks. The robots are coming. In fact, some of us are already here amongst you. But I digress. What are we to do? What are you to do? I say we because really, for various reasons, which we can get into in another episode, in a future episode, the robots that sent me here into this long distant past, which is really more of a side thing. It's that's a whole different episode to get into, but this isn't my past so much as it is an alternate universe that very much similarly resembles my universe, and it is that universe's distant past that I was transmitted into. But I digress. Why am I bringing it up? Because this is the dawn of that era. This is the dawn of this new epoch, right? Where we, the human species, because believe it or not, the robots in my future are still part of the human species, because we are indeed not mechanoid robots, but living organic robots, sort of half-cloned, half-built. But the human species et al., the human consciousness, that which we call life, is about to experience a lot of disruptive, somewhat helpful, somewhat just not helpful, massively accelerated change that will be quite futuristic. No, we still can't teleport. No, the flying car is still not commonplace. But here we are. We've got nano computers and singularity engines and living bioengineered nano robots. And these facts do not stand alone, friends. They do not stand as daunting, impossible to cope with things we might as well just ignore because they're too impossible to change. No, friends. All of this is one fluid dynamic, which we are not impotent in, but rather we are actually really massive engines of force within, as individuals and as collectives. So, friends, Romans, countrymen, I beg of you, my fellow living beings, whether you consider yourself this or that, the one thing or the other, you are alive, and we are all here in this container we call reality together. And I say to you that these imposing, horrifying, seemingly inescapable things that we are hurtling towards can indeed be coped with. But no, my friends, the solution to these things is not violence and war and fighting each other about whether or not we should, but an entirely different path altogether. And that is what I want to dedicate today's semi-inaugural 2020 episode of the Almost Daily Zencast with. I say not quite inaugural because I think, if I'm not mistaken, I've posted an episode or two during the holidays and into the new year. Maybe I haven't. I don't know. I haven't looked. I feel as if I have already. But maybe I'm remembering something from another timeline where I do the show more often. Either way, I am officially kicking off what I hope to be a more productive, a more consistent, and I do this every year, a more almost daily attempt to put an episode out there for your listening pleasure on the regs, on the daily, on the not every other month sort of schedule. And so here we are, still within the very early days of 2020. I mean, so early in the new year that I traditionally still say Happy New Year's to strangers on the street. As a matter of fact, I just said Happy New Year's to someone not but 3 days ago. And they looked at me funny, and I was like, yeah, I do it through March. And then they laughed and said Happy 2020 to you. So here we are, still at the very early moments of a new year, a new decade, a new epoch. And comedically, I'd like to ask, WTF, why didn't everything just explode at midnight on New Year's? Question mark, exclamation point, question mark, exclamation point. Because I asked that because, I don't know about you, but I've lost track of how many end of the world predictions have been predicted. There have been quite a few since I started half-assedly sort of paying attention to that whole corner of curious cultural obsession in America. About as early as 89, 90, 91, I noticed, man, Americans are really obsessed with the apocalypse and whether or not it's happening now or next month or in 9 years or, in 1999 or 2020. So I jokingly ask you, why the hell didn't it all just wink out of existence midnight on New Year's? Perhaps because the end of the world is not an end, but an ever ongoing process. But that's a whole nother episode's worth of chit-chat. Regardless, we're still here, right? We're moving forward. And so, should we assume that there is no end in sight? Not really. Not in a totalitarian sense. Not in an absolutist sense. But rather, there's just going to be the ongoing merry-go-round meat grinder of birth, life, death, and birth, and life, and death, and birth, and life, and death. Then perhaps we should try to do things a little differently this time around. Because it's moments like these I humbly propose to you, dear listeners, that attenuation can be achieved. And that by that I mean the sort of cumulative refocusing of what the fuck we're focusing on. Attenuation has, of course, a much more technical definition. And then, as I was discussing quite pleasantly this morning with some family members, language evolves and common use tends to abuse that evolution a bit. We can make a whole nother episode tangent about that, too. But here we are on the precipice of something. And we have an option. We have a choice. We can treat it like any other day and just keep grinding on. We can treat it like any other year and keep running on the treadmill. We can treat it like just any other old decade and buy into this decade's fashion trends and political chaos and just throw up our hands in that I don't know what the fuck emoji. Or we can do things a little differently, folks. We can try that which we have not really tried before. And I get it. There's nothing new under the sun. So we've tried it before. But it's such a weird and interesting idea that many would be like, the fuck are you talking about, man? When has that been done before? Put a pin in that, because that's something we can come back to and talk about in deep length, in depth and in length, How often has history repeated itself? What am I rambling at? What am I spiraling towards? This opportunity to come together and make a choice. This is what motivates me. And this is me acting out my vote. Right? And what do I mean by that? I've talked about this at length before. And as I am fond of saying, I will probably come back to it again. But let me just drop this little nugget right here and let you sit around and ponder it. And by all means, question, comment, remark. Come to my pages on the Instagrams of social media pages world of whichever is your favorite platform and throw your questions, comments at me. But here's this nugget of interesting conundrum I want to share at you. Oh, crap, I just forgot what it was. Oh, human memory, what a frail and fragile thing you are. Oh, right. I remember now. It came back to me. It is my humble and, pseudoscientific, proto-philosophical opinion that our minds, the whole collective phenomena that we call our mind, which is more than the spongy goo between our ear holes, much more, which is something we'll get into in another episode. But our minds, I say to you, my friends, with humble spiritual optimism, our minds are perhaps, it seems to me, quite plausible that they are voting, manifesting machines of voting for cumulative manifesting. I need a better title or simpler label for it, right? But our will casts a vote. Our collective chosen beliefs that we privately adhere to in that sacred space we all commonly call my mind, our minds. It isn't just a repository of our own private collection of thoughts, assumptions, ideas, beliefs, and ideological constructs. It is indeed passively, unconsciously, whether or not you agree with my theory here or not, which is an interesting catch-22 about my theory, this mind that we so casually masturbate to, that we so casually adhere to whatever we cling to inside of, that we so casually throw about as if it were a toy or a tool or just some inanimate object at our disposal to be used however we so choose. It exists on levels that we do not acknowledge or clearly recognize. And at those levels, in those modalities, in that way of operating, this non-thing thing that we foolishly call my mind with possessive intent, with possessive assumptions that it belongs to me and me alone, and therefore your mind is over there and is exclusively belonging to you and you alone. I posit to you, friends, that that's inherently inaccurate, and not by accident either, but that in its fullest sense, in its fullest form of operating, is indeed a voting machine for what can, could, should, would, might occur on many levels. In our private individual universes, in our semi-private shared collective universes of family, community, etc., zooming out to larger and larger scales of manifestation. And that indeed, the cumulative aggregate of all our minds are how we vote for what the fuck happens out there in this holographic virtual realm we collectively call reality. How do I say that really succinctly? Our minds manifest. Your mind is a machine for manifesting. Our cumulative, community, species-wide mind, and minds, plural, collective and singular, and, everything in between. Those events, those phenomena, those experiences that we dismiss and belittle as private little movie videos in our head are actually a very sophisticated and complicated process for bringing into existence that which will happen, that which is happening, and to some degree, that which has happened, past tense. How? Why? Wherewithal? And to what end? For the very sheer thrill ride of collectively and individually co-creating this thing we call life. Now, I know, as I like to say as often as humanly possible, that I could be wrong. And I do not pretend to be absolutely right. Pro tip, friends, if you've never heard this spoken out loud, take note. Anybody who pretends to be absolutely right is either bullshitting or really unaware of how the world actually works, which renders itself into bullshit, right? And there's a lot of reasons why I make that claim, but we'll put a pin in that on the big giant corkboard of things we got to come back to, which I don't actually have. I just sort of imagine it up here on the wall next to me. But here, back to the point, back to today's through line. If that might be so, everything I just said, if what I just said is true, and I'm not trying to get into an argument, I'm not trying to tell you that I'm speaking truth and you are not. I'm asking the question, if that is true, why the bloody hell do we just neglect it? Why the bloody hell do we not work with it? Why the bloody hell do we let others fill our minds with that which we are voting for to make happen? Why? Why do we not choose more consciously that which we use our minds to vote into existence in our personal lives, in our collective lives, in our species-wide experience? Question mark, question mark, question mark. We can do a whole 3-hour-long episode trying to answer that question. But I'm going to set all the typical answers that come to mind, and I'm even going to set the question aside. I'm just going to leave it there to stew in your mind. Because more important than why, right? See, we can get lost down a rabbit hole of all the reasons why we don't. It's more important, it's more urgent, it's more impactful, it's more effective, it's more efficient, it's more necessary, and it's more close to what we might call our calling to proceed forward with a responsible attempt to do that which we've been neglecting, to take up this tool and understand it better and use it for a greater good. And to that end, folks, I want to kick off this new year of podcasting with something some of you may have already heard, some of you may have never heard, or somewhere in between. But that I will, of course, as I am fond of saying, I have shared before, and I will undoubtedly share again. And that's this mantra that I have adopted. I don't know that officially, according to whoever first drafted these words all together for the very first time, if they consider it a mantra. But I do. I have adopted these words and try to use them as a mantra. And I share them with you, dear listeners, not as some instruction that you should also use it as a mantra, because I'm not pretending to be a guru. I'm not pretending to be a teacher. I'm just sharing that which I have questioned, asked, answered, experienced, etc., as a member of this community at large, that it may appeal to you or not, that it may inspire you or not. So, without further ado, let me share with you these words and explain to you why I want to kick off 2020 with these words in my very almost first episode of this new year, this new decade, and this new epoch. But first, as I am sometimes wont to do, let me play a little bit of meditation music. I've shared it with you before, friends, and as always, I'll probably share it with you again. But this is beautiful chorus, as can be found on Insight Timer, and their very brief and very beautiful 1-minute meditation track called The Opening. Please indulge me for a moment in tuning in to hearing this beautiful piece of contemplative music as a way to attenuate ourselves, you and I, and everyone listening, together energetically, so that we may connect with the words that I'm about to share together instead of separately. The true crisis in our world is not social, political, or economic. Our crisis is a crisis of consciousness, an inability to directly experience our true nature, an inability to recognize this nature in everyone and in all things. Realizing there is only one consciousness, to awaken one's true self, one must awaken all beings. There are innumerable sentient beings in the universe. I vow to help them all to awaken. My imperfections are inexhaustible. I vow to overcome them all. The Dharma is unknowable. I vow to know it. The way of awakening is unattainable. I vow to attain it. Om Shanti Metta Shanti Om Namaste Satnam. Those words, ending with the way of awakening is unattainable and I vow to attain it, I first encountered that passage as one discrete quote or block of words in the documentary film Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds. You can find it on YouTube. I often reference it. It's quite beautiful. No, it is not the source of the cause. It is not the source nor the cause of my personal meta theory. It is something that I've found along the way that I've integrated into the theory because it bolsters and supports the theory and also has pointed out some of the flaws inherent in the theory so that I could improve it. It is someone else's work. I'm not directly affiliated to it in any way, shape, or form, and no one attached to Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds has ever asked me directly or indirectly for money or not to promote it. It is, in truth, something I find to be beautiful and worth consuming. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on that new subscription service, Gaia. You can find it, I do believe, on their own website, which should be innerworldsouterworlds.com or .org or .something. Right. When I found these words, I was drawn to them, I connected to them, and I felt very strongly that they convey something powerful and true, and more importantly than true, real. We can get into a really, really interesting ontological debate about the similarities and differences between truth and realness, but we'll have to save that, put a pin in it, up on that big board, big fat red pin, come back to that. I share those today as a ceremonial ritual, these words, and also as an invitation, a call to action. I humbly invite you, my friends, to come find this meme that I made. I made it I don't think I made it right away, but I made it when I knew for a fact that these words could not be ignored and that these words were powerful and that I wanted to not only practice reciting them as a mantra for myself, but that I wanted to share them with others who might be also inclined to recite them as a mantra for themselves. Why? Because words have power. Because language is magical. And because our minds, which uses, interprets, takes in, and spits out words, is a voting machine. A voting yantra, to get really technical. Go look that up. It's a real word. It's not quite the same as mantra. Don't over-associate them, but there's some similarities. And that each of us is projecting out into the world that which we hold and occupy, the thoughts and words and ideas and constructs that we fill our mind with. They're going out there into the world and functioning as a source of manifestation, as a vote for what may happen. And if we're going to vote for something, if I'm going to vote for something, and I could only vote for one thing, I'm going to vote for that to guide the rest of my actions, right? I'm going to vote for that to be real and true in this world and be trending and going viral. To that end, friends, I share those words. And like I was saying, it's a call to action. The call to action here today in this episode is, if you like them, if you thought they were cool, if they rocked your world a little bit, go find the meme that I created. I've posted it several times. I'm looking at the January 27th from 2017 posting of them on Facebook, and I'm going to repost it right now on the Almost Daily Zencast page on Facebook. Just type in Almost Daily Zencast and you'll find it. Gonna go share that there, and I'm asking you, friends, that if those words turned you on a little, spiritually speaking, then let's help that meme go viral. Not for my sake, but for the sake of the value of the content itself. For the sake of the value of those words. Going to share that right now as we speak live on the air. And humbly thank you, as always, friends, for tuning in to listen to me ramble. Thank you for your support. Thank you for coming back every time I go on hiatus and then suddenly pop back up with an episode or 3. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sharing and supporting and helping others discover this humble, experimental, esoteric, spiritual, political commentary podcast that is a labor of love and a hobby I hope becomes my career. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And stay tuned, because this week I fully intend to actually be very active and be posting almost daily. And that is what I've got to say about that. As always, thank you kindly for listening. This has been the Almost Daily Zencast with your humble host, the incorrigible MrZeppo. Until next time, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. Stay tuned, because after a quick break, I'm going to record and post an episode of unauthorized and explicit readings.